Hi. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is Katie Huffling, the Executive Director of the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. We are really excited today to have Ann Hulick talking to us about the Clean Water Rule. This is a really important rule for clean water for all of us. And so today she'll be talking about um, some of the issues around clean water right now and the Clean Water Rule. And then we have lots of opportunities for action. So I hope this will inspire all of you to work with us to support clean water. We really need the voices of nurses being front and center around this rule. There's a lot of environmentalist voices, and that's important too, but we all know that clean water is so essential for human health. And so as nurses, our voice is so important. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be able to offer 1 hour of nursing continuing education credit for today's webinar, and we will be sending out an evaluation after the webinar. In order to receive the 1 hour of CE, you do need to fill out that evaluation. Once you fill out the evaluation, a pop-up window will appear, and that has a link to download the certificate for that. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat box, which you'll find, I believe it's on the left of your screen. There's a thing that you can click on and enter your questions there, and then we'll be taking all of those at the end. And if you have any technical difficulties, please chat them in there as well. One thing that we have found, if you are having problems, if you switch to the web browser Chrome, that does seem to help get rid of a lot of those issues. So I do recommend trying that first. So I'm so pleased to introduce Ann Hulick. She's the Director of Clean Water Action. She's been a fabulous champion of clean water and environmental health for a number of years, and she's also co-chair of the Annie Policy and Advocacy Work Group. And so we're so excited to hear what she has to say about the Clean Water Rule and clean water for all of us. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you all so much for joining this webinar today. I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your very busy schedules to participate and learn more about these very critical threats to our water. And I want to thank my colleagues, Katie and Kara, and all my colleagues at Annie for hosting this webinar. Katie's correct. It really is vital that nurses speak out for protecting our water, which is truly a public health crisis at this time. So I'm going to talk today about the numerous threats to our water, and we'll run through not only the current threats to our water and sources of water pollution, we'll talk about some of the health impacts associated with these threats, and we'll discuss an urgent threat that is affecting us all right now, no matter where we are in the country, and why your action is so critical to public health. So you all know, as well as I do, that nurses understand that water is truly life. We see it in Flint still to this day. We see it in Puerto Rico. We see it right now with the current impacts of Hurricane Florence in the Carolinas. Most of us are fortunate to have abundant water and safe water for drinking in this country. Yet, we can't take that for granted. Our waters are under threat, and it's really vital, as Katie mentioned, for nurses to speak out. So I'm going to go through, as I said, a kind of the overview of current threats to our water and water pollution, and then talk a little bit about an urgent threat, the Clean Water Rule, and how we can all, as nurses, no matter where we are or what we're doing, easy ways for us to engage and get our voices heard. This is truly, I think, one of the most critical public health issues of our time. So this slide just briefly lists the threats to our water. And I could probably think of more, but we only have an hour. And I will leave some time for questions because we really do want to hear from all of you about what you're experiencing in your communities and how we can help you engage. So the current threats to our water include climate change, chemical spills, stormwater runoff, fracking and fracking waste, coal ash, nutrient and chemical pollution, and chemicals like lead and Pfas getting into our drinking water and other water sources. And then lastly, repeal of the Clean Water Rule. So we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So the first threat, and these are not in any order, this is just how we're talking about them. The first threat, here you'll see an illustration of how climate change is impacting our soil and water quality and quantity, frankly. So going through and kind of looking at this pictorial, we are understanding and frankly experiencing right now warmer temperatures across the country, which can lead to drought, and the health impacts associated with that are heat stress, dehydration, heat stroke. We're seeing more intense storms, which lead to really intense runoff, flooding, combined sewer overflows, which all contribute to bacterial and chemical contamination, which can lead to GI problems, dehydration, GI upset, often that we don't connect to contaminated water. We're seeing changes in temperatures of surface water that lead to growth of algae and, again, impacting people's gastrointestinal systems, causing dehydration, diarrhea, and the like. And we're also seeing from climate change groundwater contamination. So groundwater, as you all know, feeds into our drinking water sources and cleans the water that's flowing into those sources. So any impacts to our groundwater can impact our drinking water as well. On this slide, this is the next threat, and it's really two threats in one, chemical spills and stormwater runoff. So I'll start with a picture on the left. You'll see that is a picture of stormwater runoff. It's probably something that you all see in your communities, on your streets, all the time. And I know I do. I never really thought about it too much, but it is a major, major problem of water pollution in this country. So stormwater runoff is just the rain that flows onto our hard, impervious surfaces and picks up all of the oil and gas and toxic chemicals and salts on our roads that leads into those storm drains, which flow directly into rivers and streams and obviously pollutes our water. So stormwater is a real big source of pollution. And then the picture on the right is a picture of chemical storage tanks. And chemical spills is a really concerning issue, particularly with old containers and storms that may impact the integrity of these containers. So in 1972, when the Clean Water Act was passed, the Clean Water Act directed the federal government to set up a program to prevent spills and leaks from places that store hazardous chemicals. And that program was never put into place. But 40 years later, in 2016, a lawsuit was filed against the EPA to push them to adopt a rule that would actually do what the law required to prevent spills and leaks from these chemical storage facilities. And unfortunately, the EPA is arguing right now, under the current administration, that existing programs are perfectly enough to protect public health, to protect people and water bodies from any leakage or breakage of integrity of these tanks. So we call it the EPA Do Nothing Rule. It's a huge concern, particularly now we're seeing these incredible storms. Many of these tanks are located near waterways and in underserved and overburdened, disproportionately impacted communities. So we know that many more protections are required to assure that these tanks are safe. And you can just imagine, if you think about it, all of the chemicals that are stored in these containers and what happens if they leak or breach. The next threat here is fracking. So many of you, I'm sure all of you know what fracking is. It's our current processes of getting oil and natural gas from deep underground shale rock resources. And not only the drilling, but also the transportation of that waste is a real problem. So you'll see on the right kind of a pictorial of concerns of the actual fracking process and how that is a huge concern for impacting groundwater supplies from our water. The chemicals that are used in the fracking process contain highly toxic chemicals like benzene and cadmium and many chemicals linked to cancer. On the left, you'll see a picture of a fracking wastewater pond, and these ponds are just there to hold the fracking wastewater, which is a huge volume of water that comes out of the fracking process. So even in states like where I live in Connecticut, where we don't frack for natural gas and oil, one of the big issues that we're experiencing is the issue of potentially importing fracking waste into our state. One, to help states distribute waste, and two, to see if there are useful sources for this toxic wastewater, which is just frankly unbelievable, but there are thoughts about using it for de-icing our roads and things like that. So fracking wastewater, even if we don't live in a state that fracks, is a huge public health concern. You'll see on that picture on the left that these are just open ponds. Generally, they're lined, but you can just imagine if a huge storm comes through, how that could easily be breached. You can also imagine that the transportation of this fracking waste to different communities across the country raises significant health and environmental concerns. In a 2016 study by the Yale School of Public Health, and this is just one study, but I think one that as nurses we can all trust, there was over 1,000 chemicals found in fracking waste, including arsenic, benzene, selenium, cadmium, lead, formaldehyde, chlorine, mercury, and those are just a few. In addition to the toxic chemicals, much of this wastewater contains radioactive material as well. So as nurses, again, we all understand the health implications if those ponds or wastewater treatment ponds are breached. The next threat that I wanted to talk about is coal ash. And coal ash is the byproduct of burning coal. This toxic waste contains lead, arsenic, mercury, selenium, numerous other chemicals known to be dangerous to humans as well as the environment. And it is one of the largest industrial waste streams that we see in our country now, as coal utilities produce over 110 tons of this toxic waste every year. So, and they have to find, like fracking wastewater, they have to find places to store this ash. So they put it in ponds, and you'll see kind of that is a picture of a coal ash pond or waste site. They put it there and store it. After decades of pressure from communities living near these sites, burdened by this pollution, the EPA, under the previous administration, adopted a rule to require that coal utilities dispose of this waste responsibly and help prevent these pollutants in coal ash from contaminating groundwater in nearby rivers, streams, and lakes, and impacting public health. Unfortunately, under our current administration, again, there is an attempt to roll back that rule and reverse the progress that we've made by allowing states or even the coal utilities themselves to determine what their own rules are for managing coal ash. So these ponds are frequently unlined. They're frequently located near water sites, and these pollutants, as you see up in the picture, are highly toxic to human health and the environment. So it's a real concern for all of the people living in these communities near coal ash and near coal fire burning power plants. So it's a public health issue that nurses really need to pay attention to. In fact, just a few days ago with Hurricane Florence, the Duke Energy coal fire burning power plant in North Carolina at the Sutton power plant breached, and this is a very low estimate reported by Duke Energy. 1,500 cubic meters of that ash have now flowed into the very nearby lake that is used predominantly by people in that community for fishing and recreation. Again, a huge public health concern. The next threat to our waters is nutrient pollution, and nutrient pollution generally means nitrogen and phosphorus and bacteria from waste, particularly animal waste, getting into our waters. And basically, nutrient pollution is often naturally occurring, but when there are huge sources, like you see here on the slide, of big ag farms, lawn fertilizers that we all use to make our lawns green, again, the stormwater runoff, stormwater treatment plants, and even some detergents and soaps, as you all know, I'm sure, impact the pH of our water. And when excessive amounts of these nutrients get into our waterways, they impact the oxygen levels in the water and cause severe algal blooms, which block light that is needed for plants to grow. And when these algae and the plants die and begin to decay and die, the oxygen in the water is used up, which leads to very low oxygen levels in the water, which then in turn kills any aquatic life like fish and other species, amphibians, etc. You've all likely seen this nutrient pollution in your communities. I know I see it in little streams around where I live, and it is a huge problem even in the Great Lakes. So it's a very concerning major source of contamination, and again leads to GI upset, GI problems, dehydration, diarrhea, all of those kinds of things when people are exposed. The next threat to our water are things that we as nurses are pretty familiar with, and that is chemicals in our water. So we all know about lead. We're still deeply concerned about what happened in Flint, Michigan. But I wanted to share with you one of the emerging contaminants that is getting a lot of attention right now, and quite frankly, we probably all have in our bodies, and that is poly and perfluoroalkyl substances, or Pfas. And these chemicals are a class of compounds that are very effective for the products in which they're used. They're resistant to heat, water, oil, grease, and they've been used in so many different things, not only in industrial processes, but many consumer products. So think of anything that's anti-stain, anti-stick, anti-grease. So Teflon pans, food packaging, food serviceware, our carpets, our textiles, upholstery. It's also found in firefighting foam and metal plating. And these chemicals are of huge concern because of the health impacts that you're seeing here. There's a lot of research, mostly in animal studies, linking exposure to these chemicals with these particular health impacts. But we also know that there's strong links to human health impacts as well. And I just wanted to point out that you can get a great deal of information on this class of chemicals from colleagues at the Green Science Policy Institute, which I've provided the URL there for you. These chemicals are of concern because due to their fluorine and carbon bond, they never break down. They bioaccumulate, they're persistent, and they resist degradation in the environment. Bioaccumulation means that their concentration increases over time in the blood and in our organs. And as I said earlier, we know from biomonitoring studies that we all have these chemicals in our bodies right now. And the Environmental Working Group and others have published reports recently that demonstrate that there's PFAS contamination in many water sources throughout the country. I call it the next lead problem. It is something that, because these products and these chemicals are so ubiquitous, it's hard to know what the solutions are, frankly, but it's something that nurses need to understand and need to be aware of and speaking out about. And then the last threat that we really want to talk about today, and it is one that is an urgent threat that really affects us all, frankly. No matter where we are in the United States, this is a threat for all Americans, and that is the repeal of the Clean Water Rule. And that is why, again, it's so important that you're here today, and so important that you join us with the actions that we'll share with you to speak out in support of the Clean Water Rule. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what the rule is, why it's important, what it does, and then we'll talk about some actions. So what is the Clean Water Rule? So going back in 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed into law, as a result of the fact that our waters were considered the dumping grounds for our waste. Our waters were so polluted that actually waters in Ohio, the Cuyahoga River, caught on fire on multiple occasions. They were our sewers at that time, and that wasn't that long ago. So the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, It provided a number of very, fundamental and wonderful protections and mechanisms to clean up our water and protect our water in the future. The problem was that there were many court challenges to the scope of the Clean Water Act. There was a lot of confusion about which waters does it cover. Does it cover the stream on my farm, or does it cover, this river that's going from, the top of the country back all the way down, like the Mississippi. So there was tons of confusion about the scope of the Clean Water Act and a ton of court cases that eventually rose up to the Supreme Court. And there were two significant cases in 2007 and 2008, which I'm not going to go into in a lot of detail, but those cases, the outcome of those cases actually caused more confusion. It was not a majority vote, it was a plurality vote, meaning there was not even consensus among the 9 Supreme Court judges. And there were not rules, but tests, the traditionally navigable waters test and the significant nexus test that unfortunately didn't help to clarify which waters were covered under the Clean Water Act and actually limited the scope of what was covered. There was a lot of confusion over wetlands, for example, and upstreams that fed into larger drinking water sources. So the Clean Water Rule in 2015, our United States Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama addressed this issue of confusion as required by the Supreme Court to clarify what waters are protected under the Clean Water Act. And the rule was took many, many years to adopt and involved an incredible amount of science and stakeholder engagement across the country. And it protected streams and wetlands that supply drinking water for 117 million Americans, which is 1 in 3 of us. So again, that's why this is an urgent threat, because this is a rule that impacts all of us and assures that we have sources of safe drinking water protected by our federal government. So this rule is often called the Waters of the United States Rule, or WOTUS. And essentially, I've included a little bit of language here. It refers to all waters currently used in commerce, all interstate waters, including wetlands. I'm going to the next slide. All other waters, such as lakes, rivers, streams, mudflats. So what it attempted to do was really delineate very clearly those waters that are protected under the Clean Water Act. The last bullet you'll see, it also included tributaries of waters adjacent to, and wetlands adjacent to waters. The thing that I want to point out is that what the rule did not do was it did not expand the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act. It merely kind of listed out, as I just showed you, all of the water bodies that were intended to be protected under federal law. So that was adopted in 2015. It was really, I think, a historic moment, and it laid essentially the groundwork that water for, drinking water sources for 1 in 3 Americans would be protected. And it recognized that those upstream rivers and wetlands that flow into drinking water sources, even if they dry up a little bit during the year, are important ecologically in terms of protecting our water. So again, this is for 1 in 3 people in the United States will be impacted by repealing this rule. So the latest update is that there have been ongoing court cases since this EPA Clean Water Rule was adopted in 2015. There's been a lot of industry and big ag opposition to the rule, a lot of concerns that this was government overreach, and so the rule is still being contested through the courts in many different districts throughout the country. When the current administration came into place, one of their first things that they wanted to do was repeal the Clean Water Rule and potentially replace it with something else. And that is kind of the essence of why we're here today. Even up to August 16th, just 3 days ago, there's been these contentious court cases that have gone on. And on August 16th, the U.S. District Court of South Carolina sided with environmentalists, plaintiffs like us, like Clean Water Action, and against the Trump administration on a revised applicability date. And that's really not all that important, but what it did was, for that district, it allowed the rule to stay in place. So right now, the Clean Water Rule is upheld in 23 states, including my state in Connecticut, but it remains suspended in 27 other states across the country because the Trump administration has, started the ball rolling to repeal this rule. So this Clean Water Rule that protects our waters, again, for 1 in 3 drinking water sources for 1 in 3 Americans across the country, is a huge public health threat right now, and will have potentially a very serious impact on our drinking water sources going forward. And as you all know, this is a huge public health crisis. So what can nurses do? So thanks to Annie, we are the only organization, I believe, that's really mobilizing nurses across the country to speak out. And Katie articulated this really well in the beginning. This is a critical public health crisis. And so what we'd like to do is get nurses across the country to engage with us and to take action. And we want to do a few things, and we're going to make it super easy for any nurse that wants to participate. Our first goal is to have a sign-on letter to the current EPA Administrator Wheeler with a goal of 200 nurses at minimum. I think we can get way more than that, to sign on to a letter that we're going to draft and urging them to oppose any rollback of the Clean Water Rule. We want to send letters to the editor or op-eds to local papers around the country, and we will help draft those letters. Katie and Kara and I have already drafted 4 or 5 letters that we can give to you that you can just tweak and submit into your local paper. We want to help you contact your United States representatives and senators with a couple of talking points, and we will walk you through that if you'd like to do that. Honestly, it takes about 1 minute. You can dial the number. You'll probably get a staff person or leave a message, and all we want you to say is that your name, where you live, your address, and that you support the Clean Water Rule and you oppose any efforts to repeal it and replace it with something else. And that you're, as a nurse, this is a public health issue. We want to do a telepresser in Florida and Pennsylvania. So a telepresser is like a press event but online. And I don't know if there are any nurses from Florida or Pennsylvania on the call right now, but we're targeting those couple of states because your United States senators and representatives are key to helping potentially stop this attempt by the current administration. And lastly, I wanted to share this URL with you, which is a report that I think you'll find really, really helpful and informative that was done by Katie and a couple of other of our Annie colleagues, which really describes the health impacts of pollution, water pollution. So I hope you check that out. It's a really great read and easy to follow. And lastly, I want to close by saying, why should nurses act? You know, frankly, you are all so busy. You're worried about saving people's lives. You're exhausted from working crazy hours and, long shifts. We understand that. But I want to just reinforce with you that Gallup poll after Gallup poll says that nurses are one of the most trusted professionals, and it is really important for you to understand and trust that you bring a credible voice to this issue and to all the issues that you speak out about. As Katie mentioned, a lot of us as environmental group leaders are speaking out and working really hard on opposing any rollback to this rule. But bringing nurses to the table raises it to a whole different level, and I hope that you will trust that that is true. And then lastly, you all know and can say it better than anybody else that protecting water is protecting health. And there is no more important charge for us than doing that. We saw it in Flint. We're seeing it in the Carolinas right now. We saw it in Puerto Rico. Nurses need to be speaking out about this issue. And again, we can give you all the tools and all the talking points to do just that. So we really hope you engage with us and commit to that sign-on letter, commit to maybe submitting one of the letters that we write to your local paper. Whatever you can do will make a huge, huge difference. So I think I'll close there, Katie and Kara, and leave time for any questions.
Great, Anne. Thank you so much. That was a really great presentation. And it's unfortunate that we have so many of these water issues to tackle.
I know. I worried that I was depressing everybody, but
but there's things we can do. So I think that that's the important point to make here is, with concerted effort on our part, hopefully we can make some positive changes and get some positive movement happening. We've gotten a couple questions about the letters. The sign-on letter, we will send out a link after this webinar. We'll be sending out a email that'll have a link to the evaluation, to the sign-on letter, a little more information on our water report. So you have it all there. Please feel free to share this information with others. We'll be posting the webinar on our website as well. So if you have friends and colleagues who weren't able to be on the call today, they'll be able to view it on our website, and CE will still be available on the website as well. We have a couple questions, Anne. One of the participants, she said she's in Texas, and she brings up an interesting point. In her area in Austin, they're trying to open a new sewage plant that could discharge almost 400,000 gallons of effluent per day. And how can nurses get engaged in something like that? minimize risks to the environment and the community.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts?
I think that is a great, honestly, thank you for being aware of that, number one. I would start by contacting your local or your state, environmental agency, as well as your public health agency, and learn about any efforts of what can be done, and raise the issue that you're concerned as a nurse about water quality, the impacts to the water, to human health and the environment. If there's any meetings, it would be great if you or other nurses could show up and just not even provide testimony per se, but just introduce yourself as a nurse and ask some questions that, raise the issue that you're concerned. I think those are the best places to start. I think it's a really, it is an important issue that these stormwater, these waste treatment plants, really have to be monitored. And I don't know what the laws are in your state, but as a nurse, you don't need to know all those laws. Just start asking the questions, and very quickly, I think you will be recognized as an advocate for protecting public health and the environment from, wastewater flows.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of these public hearings and meetings, when they occur, there isn't a lot of times many health professionals at those meetings. And so attending them and bringing the voice of nurses to those meetings is really powerful.
It really is. Again, even if you don't have to be an expert, just go and identify yourself as a nurse and ask a couple questions. What's being done to assure public health concerns are addressed?
Mm-hmm. So the next question is on fluoride in water. They're talking about some of the studies that are showing some health harms related to fluoridating water. And they were asking if we were aware of a lawsuit against the EPA about fluoride in water related to neurotoxicity that's been filed by Food and Water Watch, American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. We had actually had a presentation by someone working on this issue a couple years ago. We were having a challenging time getting kind of the opposing viewpoint. Like, this person was very strongly anti-fluoridation, and we felt like we needed to get both sides so that we could make an educated decision. And unfortunately, we're not able to get someone to come on from the other side. So we've been kind of watching it as an organization, but we haven't been actively involved in it. They were asking if nurses and physicians would know what symptoms to look for if they suspected overfluoridation. And I'm guessing most nurses and physicians probably don't. I mean, just like with a lot of other environmental exposures, many of them weren't trained to assess for these types of exposures, and so may not know about them. But one resource that I would recommend to all of you is the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Units. For issues like this, where you may suspect exposures or there may be issues in your community with these types of exposures, they're in each EPA region. They're free, and they have toxicologists, nurses, physicians, nurse midwives on staff that you can call, and they can answer your questions, help guide you to resources, and provide support in things like what symptoms to assess for, if there's testing that should be done, that type of thing. And someone was asking if if we would be able to provide the slides from today's presentation.
Absolutely. Yep. As long as you're fine with that, Katie, I'm
sure.
happy to. Yeah, share away.
Great.
I'm also happy if anybody has more detailed questions. You have all of our contact information there. I'm more than willing to talk with any of you about specific questions or whatever. I think, again, the focus of this today was really to just, educate you on these threats and the Clean Water Rule. So anything that we can do to help with the water issues that you're dealing with in your communities and to help you feel comfortable, we're here for you.
Couple points. Someone was asking about sharing these with the students, and we'd love to have students sign on to our letter as well. So, any of you that are faculty members, please, share this information with your students. We think it's a great way for them to start engaging in policy and advocacy issues. So we'd love to have them sign on. For the telepressors, I just wanted to give you a little bit more information. If any of you are in Florida or Pennsylvania, I think in Florida, talking about anything you may have seen around the algal outbreaks there. In Pennsylvania, we've had issues with Pfas and fracking wastewater, different impacts to the water supply in both states. And these telepressors are a really great way to get the nursing perspective out there, and they're super easy to do. We can help write your statement. You just need to speak for a couple minutes. The reporters that come on the line, they may ask you questions. A lot of times it's like one or two kind of simple questions, and we can really help with that. So I don't want any of you to be intimidated about that. But we are looking for volunteers. When I send out the information, please respond to Kara, Ann, or I if you'd like more information on that, or if you want to volunteer. We're hoping to get the telepressors done within the next few weeks, especially with the Clean Water Rule announcement coming any day now. We'd like to get right on this. And I think it's a really great opportunity to change the discussion in your states about how these environmental issues are impacting the health of the residents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have somebody here from Florida. She's saying, they've been having the red tide and blue-green algae, and that it's becoming a big issue in the election, as it should. I mean, it's really impacting health. It's impacting tourism, which is such a big part of the economy. It's having a huge ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? We have time for one or two more. Great. Well, I don't see any more questions popping up. Thank you all so much for being on here today. Again, we'll be on the lookout for an email, from us, and that'll have a link to the evaluation and to other materials in the letter. You need to make sure that you fill out the evaluation in order to get your CE credit. And thank you so much to Anne for a great presentation. It was really informative, and I hope all of you, it's inspired you to take some actions with us.
My pleasure, Katie and Kara and everyone. And again, I'm so appreciative of your time today, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you to make sure that we get a strong nursing voice out there opposing any repeal of the Clean Water Act.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.